All right, excited for everyone to be a part here today of Wicked Smart Golf. We have James Sieckmann, top golf coach, short game guru, best-selling author. You got a lot of accolades in the game. James, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Hopefully it'll be fun.
Absolutely, man. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, I was reading your book yesterday. I hadn't got through it all, but I had got through a lot, and I'd seen some of your stuff before, just as a golf writer and avid golfer myself. Kind of stumbled upon a lot of your stuff, and I love your story. Obviously, you've had a lot of success on the teaching side of things, and the third and fourth pillar of Wicked Smart Golf are, obviously finding peace on the greens, making sure you're a good putter, and then the fourth one is all about wedge wizardry. So I felt like you were going to be the guy to help us out with that. But before we get into some short game mistakes guys are making and some ways to improve, love to kind of go back in your history of the game because it's a really cool story. And how'd you fall in love with it, and what were kind of your first moments on the golf course?
Well, I was, like most young people, I did it because it was a blast, right? So way back in the day, and my oldest brother's 10 years older, and he played on the tour for 11 years, but I didn't really have an opportunity to grow up with him. He was 10 years older, so a
Hmm.
17-year-old kid's not going to hang out with a 7-year-old. But basically, we were a golf family, and it was an opportunity for me. I love being outside and meet people, and I just have great experiences. So it's, ride your bicycle down to the course and play all day and come home when it was dark. And that's kind of what my youth was.
I love it. The good old days, right? Just riding your bike to the
Right.
golf course, being there all day. That was kind of my upbringing as well. One parent would drop me off, one parent would pick me up when it was dark out, and that's so fun. I feel like every young person could really benefit from being at the golf course, learning to talk to adults, just kind of being around and learning some new things. You have a really cool story too. You caddied for your brother right at the U.S. Open. What was that like?
Well, that was a wing foot. And I think that was in 1981. I think I was 17 years old. So just a high school student. It was really cool because, you know, I wanted to be a pro. I knew at 10 years old that I wanted to be a professional player. So, and I did that for 5 years after college. I played in Asia and South America and whatnot. But uh, have an opportunity to go play caddy in the U.S. Open and all that. But he was, I think, in the European Tour at the time. He played 7 years in Europe and 11 on the PGA Tour, and one of his best friends was Seve Ballesteros. So at that U.S. Open, he and Tom Pernice played a match on I think Tuesday between Wayne Grady and Seve Ballesteros and beat him. And it was just good to be inside in the arena, so to speak, and kind of see all that up close and personal. I caddied for him quite a few other times. I caddied for him in the Masters twice, or once. He played twice, as well as a bunch of other tournaments.
Wow, wow, there's so much there to learn more about. So, Sevi, I mean, obviously just, amazing skills, just has just the ability to escape from anywhere, short game skills. Like what were some of the early things even when you saw him in person and still remember to this day that have impacted your, impact or your ability to teach the short game and kind of learn from him?
Okay, well, the first is not really my ability to teach, but it was just how competitive he was.
Mm.
He they lost that match, and I mean, he wadded up the money and threw it on the ground. He was so pissed, truthfully. Yeah, and so that the competitive spirit is huge, whether at any level. I mean, because uh, determination and focus is huge. You want a high energy, positive emotion when you play. So the best one in life is determination, and so he was gritty and tough, and yeah, his pars were unbelievable. He could make par from anywhere, and that wore people out. And I think gave him a huge competitive advantage. And then when I uh, playing and decided I was going to teach, that was where I went to say, well, I can do it, but I don't know if I can explain it. So let me get the best in the world doing it, and then I'll just study and I'll just teach what they do. So when I went caddy for my brother at the TPC Sawgrass, and I got video. He played 2 days with Seve in practice, and I got video of every shot you could hit of him, and then I got video of Raymond Floyd and Jody Mudd and Corey Pavin and my brother and whatnot. And for 4 months before I started, I was living in Florida at the time, and then moved back to start a golf academy in Omaha, Nebraska, where I still am at Shadow Ridge Country Club. And all I did was, back in the day, it was a VHS tape, and it was a big hunky TV. And all I did was just study those videos for 4 months in preparation for try to help people and explain it. And that deep dive into that kind of led to a method, or a system would be a better way to say it. A method is uh, means you're constructed into one thing, but there's plenty of chance for style within the foundational things I believe in. And so it just kind of started me down that path of dedicating myself every day to learning and growing in a short game, and being able to coach it.
Yeah, that's interesting that you were able to get all that footage and kind of study that and kind of develop that system like you mentioned. When you look back to like on your own game, was that something where you felt like short game was always a skill for you, or that was one where you knew you kind of needed to improve too?
No, it was neither. The thing that I needed to improve when I was playing that was my putting, but I two putted everything. It's like I got a one putt some. So
Yeah.
no, I mean it was just one of those things. I could do it, but I just didn't know what I was like. Most good players, I could do it, but I didn't know what I was doing. I could just hit a shot. And
Hmm.
so uh, I knew I needed to dive a little deeper in all areas because when you coach, good players make horrible coaches typically, because what they do is they go, I'm great. I was great. I felt this when I played. And so you should feel this when you play. And that doesn't work that way. Matter of fact, if you get 10 people in a room and you tell them all the same thing, you're going to hurt five of them. You might help five, but you're going to make five worse. So that's not what good coaching is. And so I needed a deeper understanding beyond what I did. And so, I'm not a smart guy, but I was just smart enough to realize that that's how it worked. And so that's where I started that self study, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Coaches have a way to say things to you sometimes in a way that you might just hear it differently from a different coach or different person, and sometimes it kind of hits you. But yeah, it is sometimes hard to even communicate. I'm a plus handicap, and I'll try and help a 10 handicap my buddy or something. And the way I explain something, I don't know anything about coaching, so it's like it is funny how the different language and being able to impact people. And I know you worked with Dave Pels, kind of that was one of your early individuals you worked with. What was that like? And just what was it like just creating your system at the beginning? Were you just trying to then have those skills and then kind of put them into that eventual system that you now have?
Yeah, no, I didn't set out to create a system. I did work for Dave for a year and a half, but I was still trying to play, and
Mhm.
I was just like I needed a little bit of extra money. But that was great because one of the things that taught me more than anything was public speaking. We had to stand in front of a room and make a presentation, and that was for someone that hadn't ever done that or studied that, that was pretty intimidating. So, after 30 years, I've gotten good at it, but that was important. And he also was huge on how to train. And I got a lesson. I mean, I worked for Dave because I took a lesson from him. We were friends, and at that point, I'm like, hey, I need a little extra money. Can you got a job for me? And I didn't start off teaching. I actually started doing data entry in his office. He's building probably one of the first statistical programs ever in golf. So, but I ultimately taught for him for a year and a half. And then when I did my thing, it's not like, oh, I'm going to create a system. I'm like, no, I just need to understand. And then when I started looking at it, I'm like, oh, there are these five or six common things that Raymond Floyd and Seve Ballesteros are doing that I didn't know was a thing. And so at some point it became a system, but yeah, I didn't set out to like, oh, I'm going to create a stick or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, so that's actually something I want to kind of get into is like what are some of those common tendencies you did see when you were, studying all this film and just starting to understand what the great players do?
Well, as you can imagine, it's very complex, and there's a lot with the theme of your show. I mean, you either got to know all of it or you got to know none of it. If you can, you know. But so, for example, uh, I was taught, okay, it's a chip. You keep your head still. You put your weight on your front foot. You keep it on your front foot. All that's wrong. Keep your hands ahead. Seve, Raymond Floyd, they did none of that. In the backswing, is you swing back, your lead shoulder goes down, so your head actually goes forward. And then in the delivery, they would make room for the release so their head would go forward and up. They'd extend. They would lift 2 to 3 inches, and the weight wasn't staying on their left side. As your left shoulder goes down, the pressure actually goes into your right foot. It's very easy to prove that on force plates right now. You got the best data on the best wedge players in the world, and for the much part, they all do it. So it's like the common things that are being taught were, in my opinion, wrong. You still hear that stuff just because people don't understand. Well, one of the nice things about like my associate with the Titleist Performance Institute is that I now can, with them, measure every great player. And I don't have to say, well, this is what it looks like to me.
Mhm.
That's how I came up with my stuff. It's like, no, this is what they do. This is actually what they do. And so that's very helpful. Uh, but that would be just an example. Another thing is they would deliver the club with the face open to the path, open to the path. Now that makes sense, I guess, if you're thinking intuitively. If you're want some height, some spin, and some forgiveness, if the face is close to the path and you hit it behind the ball, you're just going to hit a chili dip or a chunk. So, in many regards, the full swing and the short game are opposites. And that's just kind of some of the things I started to notice. And when I pieced all that stuff together, like I said, it kind of became something that I taught. I wrote about it in that book. And I've written a putting book, I've written a mental management book. So, when I've learned things, I have tried to share them because I feel like I was playing. I dedicated my from 10 years old to basically 30 years old to try and be the best player in the world, and I didn't know anything. 20 years, I didn't know. And so that's kind of where most people are. They don't know. And even the people that take lessons, they don't know because most coaches don't know, honestly.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing so much with these books too. I mean, again, I'm an author myself, and it's not an easy task to put it all together. I love all the visuals that you have in there. I think that's very helpful. And let's kind of dive into some of the stuff in this book and with short game specifically. So, one of the things, obviously, is equipment, right? We have to set ourselves up for success. In the book, you mentioned, the importance of having the right wedges. What are some like things for that in terms of cavity back versus normal
Yeah,
blade design, graphite, or same shafts for in your irons versus your wedges? I know you mentioned lie angle a little bit flatter. Take us through some of the equipment things that we need to
right.
have, just because I feel like most people are skipping that, and it's probably making things even harder.
It's huge. I'll just go through every single thing that you should do if you want to be good and you're not sure what wedges to play. Okay, number one, you want gapping of no more than 20 yards. So if you hit your pitching wedge 130 and your next wedge goes 105, you've got a problem. Okay, so typically you're looking at about 15 to 18-yard gaps max between each club. And we need to talk about probably the simplest, easiest way to get better is to know exactly how far your clubs go. And I would say most players have no idea. And I can give you a ton of examples of that. But so
Got my
know how
wedge
far they
matrix
go.
right here. Got my distance chart,
And
my wedge matrix here for you.
yeah, well, not just wedges. I'm talking every club. They
Oh
have
yeah,
no
no,
idea.
that's all of them. That's all of them. I just want to make you
Yeah.
proud.
So gapping is important. Then uh, I do like the same shaft in your wedges as you do in your irons. I do like them a tad bit heavier. But the worst thing you could do with a lob wedge is to have a one that's too upright. Okay. Uh, if you, as you fitting lie angle for full swing, obviously you're doing it for a 5 iron, you're doing it for a 6 iron, you're doing it for a 7 iron. Well, why would you fit your lob wedge for a full swing? You don't use it for a full swing. You'd want to fit it for how it's implemented around the green in the bunker when you're hitting a little 15-yard shot over the bunker. And if that's the case, the lie angle should be flatter. And I wrote about that in that book. And that's one reason why Bob Oakey and I are friends, because he read that and he goes, oh, there's a guy that knows. He goes, yeah, your lob wedge needs to be flatter than, all right. So the next thing is that you need the highest bounce wedge that you have. And it's not just the number on the bottom. That's just a made up thing. It's the width of the sole. It's the camber. How wide is it? How far is the high point from the leading edge? We'll call that the bounce, those factors. Uh, in your sand wedge. And you want your most lofted club to have the least bounce on it, whether it's the thinnest sole, uh, the low point a little closer to the leading edge, all right, less angle. And the reason why is very simple because if you're playing off firm turf, I got this table here, it's brick hard under there. What happens to the energy of the ball, the collision of the ball and the club when you hit it? Is the ball come out faster or slower?
Faster.
Faster, right? So more loft would be helpful, right? All right, now you got this brick hard lie. Do you want more bounce or less bounce?
Last bounce.
Yeah. So if you have a lot of bounce in your lob wedge, it's horrendous. You can't play off firm turf or super tight, right? The opposite would be true in soft sand or turf that gives way, or it's wet, it's been raining, or it's that grainy, dormant Bermuda. Or, I mean, there's a ton of the ball comes out slow. You want less loft. Lob wedge is a horrible choice in those conditions. Uh, you want more bounce, so there's more forgiveness with the turf. It digs less, so to speak. So you have a sand wedge with more bounce and less loft. You got to win there. If you got firm, you got a club. If you have soft, you have a club. And that way you don't get in a situation where, oh, I don't have a club that works with these conditions. So that's, and then lastly, I would say you got to have fresh grooves. And I know a lot of people are thinking, well, you get yours for free, and those guys get them for free. I don't, but that doesn't matter. If you want to be good, the club you use out of the bunker, especially, you got to replace it every year because after typically about 75 rounds, I'm not even counting practice, you lose 20% of the spin off your wedge and the launch starts to go up to a couple degrees. So you see these pros working really hard to develop this kind of low flighting spinning wedge shot. And if you got a wedge, excuse me, it's more than a year old, you got your I don't know how you're going to do it.
Hmm.
So you need a premium ball, you need sharp grooves, you need the right wedge makeup, and you don't want that gapping to be too big. And then I think, especially in your lofted club, you probably want a degree or two flatter than your normal iron set.
Perfect. That is like a master class right there for equipment. I feel like most people have none of that, and I think that will help so much, like you said, just to get them in the right setup. Can you, just to clarify, you said the 1 or 2 degrees flat, is that just for lob wedge and sand wedge, or just lob wedge?
Now, I play four wedges, so
Hmm.
my sand wedge is a degree flat, and my lob wedge is two.
Okay.
If you played three wedges, you probably do it just in your most lofted one,
Perfect.
and it
And
doesn't
then,
need to be much. But
yeah.
typically, like if you have a lob wedge that's too upright and you're trying to hit a high shot, you're just going to dig the heel, and it's going to
Hmm.
the club turf interaction is going to be poor. So especially if you don't have a relief on the sole. On that lob wedge, I do like relief both on the heel and on the back of the sole. So if you're in a tileless product, the L grind or the T grind or something like that, even the M, if you need a little bit more bounce, it would be my first choice. But um, at least that way, when you lower the handle and open the face, that the heel of the club's not going to stick or
Hmm.
catch.
I've been playing Vokey wedges since I was a sophomore in high school, so I still love my Vokeys. Always have those. I carry four. What's your take on 3 or 4 for the everyday golfer? I know you have obviously tour pros and the best of the best you guys work with, but what would you say for the guy that's like shooting mid 80s and wanting to get into the 70s? 3 or 4 wedges.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what score you choose. It's a matter how far you hit your pitching wedge. So, for
Okay.
example, let's say uh, you hit your pitching wedge over 130 yards in the air. You need to have four wedges to get the gapping correct. Okay. Typically, a guy that's hitting it over 130 yards in the air, he's not, you know, casting and getting his angles out and ballooning them up in the air. They usually have pretty good uh, impact dynamics to be able to hit it that far. If you hit your pitching wedge less than that, I would say, yeah, three is enough.
Hmm.
Uh, you're might have a middle wedge of 52 and a lob wedge of 58 or something like that. And
Hmm.
if you hit, don't hit your pitching wedge over, let's say, 105 yards, then I think two's enough. You could play, pitching like the old days, a pitching wedge and a 55 or 56-degree wedge. So
Hmm. Okay, so that's good. We got the equipment dialed. Before even getting into like what to do around the greens and different stuff, I like that you talked about self-image in the book. I actually included that in my next book because I feel like if you walk into shots feeling like you're not confident or you're not able to pull it off, you're probably not going to be able to, right? The self-image plays a huge role in our ability to do anything in life. If you don't feel like you can make money, you're not going to make as much money, right? So it's like I love that you included that. It's a wedge book, but I couldn't help but notice that. So, what is your kind of thoughts on walking into shots and having that confidence, and where does that confidence come from?
right. Well, it's not just a wedge book, it's a performance book. It's like, okay, how are you going to perform? And that has to do with how you train. There's I got two or three chapters on that, as well as the mental stuff. And exactly. And you basically are what you tell yourself you are. So if you tell yourself you can't chip, then at some point you're not going to be able to chip. Now, on the other hand, the physics does matter. And uh at some point you have to have functionality. But once you do, the last book I wrote was called Cool Under Pressure, is about understanding like anxiety, what that is, and how that robs you of focus and being in the moment and being on task. And I call it, you got to learn to play without distraction. A lot of people are distracted by their, well, usually they're distracted by like, I don't want to embarrass myself. So the main premise of the book is you got to give zero bleeps what other people think, essentially. But then there's a deeper level of focus, which I work with amateur tour player alike, which is like, how do I get my mind right before I walk in to execute when I'm under stress? Maybe it's the member guest or the member, and you want to win or whatever. So it starts with the message you give yourself every single day. And that's super important. And then another one is to give zero bleeps about like you can't have a social aspect to how you form. It's like I'm doing this for me. I'm not doing this to impress these other people. I'm doing it. I want to see how good I can be. I want to see how competitive. I want to see those type of things. I'm doing it for
Mhm.
joy. I'm doing it like we talked about being a kid and having fun. I'm doing this because I enjoy golf. I want to be with my friends. I want, there's good reasons and bad reasons. And the bad reasons usually typically are ego driven. Like I want to be known as a good player. And then you're in a basket case because if you hit a bad shot in the wrong environment, then I'm not known as that. It's embarrassing. There can't be any of that. And so, in this book, I kind of go through different things like being able to understand what that excited state is and how to file it away and focus on what you're trying to do and things like that. But yeah, you can't talk to yourself horrifically and then have that confidence and swagger to like watch this, hold my beer while I hit this shot. So it starts with that. I always tell people this in the simplest form, when you want to do something, just talk to yourself like you talk to your spouse. You don't hit it in the bunker and say, oh, you suck, honey. You're just like hang in there. Next one will be better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's shocking how much people just talk shit to themselves and then wonder why they play so bad. And it's like, man, we're just making a hard game even harder. But I do think that ego plays a big role, right? Because they're worried about what their friend's going to think, or if they are in that club championship and they just scold one out of the bunker, and people are going to be talking about it in the clubhouse. So I do think that ego plays a role. So I'm glad you brought that up. So we got the right equipment, we got the right mindset. Now let's get into some stuff around the greens. So I know you have your finesse wedge system. I feel like the first thing for any like good wedge player is just being able to analyze the lie. So like if you have the best form in the world, but you go into the wrong type of shot, or you have a different lie than you want to play, it's probably not going to work out too well. So like, what should people be looking for when they do miss the green? They're walking in, they're like, hey, I can get this up and down, but then what should that mental process be to kind of assess and then analyze?
And so if we're not going to change mechanics, then we have to develop skill. All right. And there are skills that are very important to getting the ball up and in that have nothing to do with mechanics, like choosing the right shot, judging the right lie, uh, picking the right landing spot.
Mhm.
That's a big one. And the first thing I will tell you is that it's like I'm going to hit my sand wedge. I'm going to hit like the medium flighted trajectory. I'm going to land it 2 steps on the green. It's going to break left to right and go in. Like, how do you know it's 2 steps? How do you know it's not three? It's like, I don't know how I know. I just know. Okay, that's called intrinsic knowledge. And 95% of what you know, 95% of what you know in life is intrinsic. It's like I can tell it. It's subconscious. I don't have to know. I can just do. Now, if you're going to develop that skill, are you going to develop it uh, hitting 30 shots in a row from the same place to the same pin? One experience. Yeah, you know where that needs to land now. But now all of a sudden you go to an upslope where the ball's teed up. All right, now that ball's coming out super soft, right? I need to know that so I give it the right amount of energy. That's kind of what you're saying, but also affects the spin. That ball's going to have very little spin. It's going to launch higher and have less spin. So where am I supposed to land this one? Well, if I'm only 30 balls in a pile to the same pin and I'm not getting these wild random shots, I'm never going to develop that internal sense. So patience, you got to have some patience in developing that skill set. And it's done by getting 1% better every day at judging. And the way you get better at judging is you got to have a lot of experiences. So I give you like Russell Henley, for example, who's one of my students. So we do our technical warm up. It's 12 shots with a stick and a tee. All right. So a 12 ball warm up, all in on technique. And he's not changing. He's just trying to do what we've already decided we're going to do better.
Hmm.
All right. And that's something too. It's like, oh, I don't want to change my technique. Okay. You don't have to, but are you actually doing what you're trying to do? I'm not changing, but a lot of people, the ball position migrates, they don't know it. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden they sculling balls across the green and they can't figure out why. So even if you're not going to change your technique, you got to make sure you're doing the technique you've decided every day. So he does his 12 ball warm up. Then we do two laps around the green. The first lap is just throwing balls everywhere. He's got three clubs in tow because your first decision is what club you're going to use, right? Because if it's on an upslope teed up, are you out of the rough? Are you going to use lob wedge very often?
Probably not. Probably go down to
I
sand.
would hope not, unless you want to really be bad, right? In that situation, you want to defer down and loft for sure. You get right, and I wouldn't open the face either. Typically, there.
Yeah.
So one mistake players make, besides not randomizing their practice, is they're out there with one club.
Mm.
Well, you're guaranteed to use the wrong club half the time if you're truly being random, right? So Russell's out there with three clubs. He's got his caddy Adam, actually, right? He's doing his lap around the green where he get the widest variety of shots that he could possibly hit. And his first thing is he goes, okay, Adam, take these two. I'm going to use my sand wedge because it's teed up on an upslope. It's going to come out slower. So I'm going to do this to my swing so I don't get too steep on it, right? And then I'm going to land it 3 steps on and it's going to break to the right and go in at 4 o'clock. Well, he hits the shot and he lands it 5 steps on and ends up right by the club, right by the pin. So what's he learn? He learns, oh, in that situation, I have to be able to fly it a little closer to the pin or whatever. And it's through, now he goes and does one all the way across the green off a tight line in the fairway. And it spins more and it checks. And that just this wide breadth of experiences running his process to helps him develop this skill set. That's probably the number one thing people do wrong. You go out to any club and if you're lucky, it's 10 balls to this pin and 10 balls to that pin and 10 balls. But that's not what my players do on the PGA Tour live. They truly do a lap with three
Mm.
clubs in tow. Then the next lap, he's competing. So now he's trying to do it. He's trying to add stress. And we have different games he's got to win his way off the green. So you take him practicing for a half an hour, and he's going to get this much value. And have to take the person hitting 10 balls of this pin and 10 balls of that pin, 10 balls with one club, and they're getting this value. And then they go out on the first green and they got to use this other club and they haven't practiced it. Or they pull out the wrong club because they're only comfortable with this other one. So that's the type of stuff that players do that uh, where they just like, well, I'm not skillful. I don't have a sense of where to land the ball. I'm like, of course you don't. You're not going about it the right way. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I write about a little bit in that book as well.
I loved that. I had that actually on my notes here, just block practice versus variable with short game and how that changes. And I really look back on my career too. Like when I was growing up, I was so short. I was like 4'10" when I went into high school. I was hitting it nowhere. And so I had to learn how to get up and down. So I feel like I spent a lot of time at the short game area and I would do just what you said, just throwing balls down and learning how to hit different shots. And that's definitely a skill that I wish more people would spend time on. Unfortunately, you go to the driving range, everyone's there, no one's at the short game area, no one's putting. So I feel like just getting there, but then doing, like you said, that even 30-minute pro routine of going through and having the technique and then the variable and the competitive, that's a wicked smart routine. So appreciate you sharing that. When when we look at the lie, you're going to get better at it, obviously, from that type of practice. There is some setup stuff. So you talked
Yeah.
about a little bit in the book having a weak. Do you have a little bit of a weaker grip you recommend on the short game? And is that
Uh,
all shots?
just on the trail hand grip, just
Okay.
because like if I'm right-handed, if I turn my trail hand strong, like I might have with the 5 iron, if I'm that type of player,
Hmm.
that tilts you to the right and typically closes you off, which chipping would be really bad, right? So typically you want your, let's say I'm hitting a little 8 yard shot, you want to be much more level, softer elbows so that you don't have that tilt to the right like you would with the driver or a 5 iron. So yeah, I call that a finesse grip, but I would say more like if we're getting back to the conversation about different lies, typically if you're doing it at least the way I think you should do it, the club's descending into the ball at about 6 to 7 degrees. I'm talking 10 yard shot, fairway lie, uh, normal trajectory shot with the low point a little in front. Okay, face up in the path, hopefully. So, well, there are some lies, let's say an upslope where the hill creates an angle, or teed up where you want to
Hmm.
shallow the delivery, or basically sweep it, pick it off. Think of it in simple terms. Well, if I'm going to sweep it or pick it off, typically I'm not going to take it outside and swing down, right? I'm going to be a little in and I'm going to, take less loft. And then there would be the opposite would be true. There are certain lies where you'd want to steepen the delivery slightly, uh, which would be a downslope or both really nestled in deep rough. Uh, and typically what I like to do is change that in my setup and then kind of keep my swing very similar. So, like on a downslope, I might widen out and lean into that flex into my lead knee, get the handle forward so that the club goes more up just because I'm flexing the knee and I'm at the handle forward. So they're like a lot of players, if you've played a lot of golf, I think do that somewhat intuitively. But uh, there are also a lot of people that just don't know what to do, and they practice that flat lie to this pin 30 balls in a row, and then they hit it over the first green. They're standing on a hill and the ball buried in the rough, and they make a 7. So that's another reason why you want to gather your balls and stop like in the ball up, throw them and play them out of a divot, play them off of hills. Try and give yourself as many crazy shots as you can, and at some point you'll just kind of figure out what to do. And one trick I use is so I don't allow repeats. You can't hit a bad shot and try it again. But you're thinking, how am I going to learn? You can hit a bad shot and think about it for a minute, hit 3 other shots, and then come back to it and see if that introspection and like, maybe I ought to feel like a little bit more up in the backswing. See if that works. But if you allow to me like do over, then at some point you're just thinking about your technique and you're just you're lost as far as not executing the shot. You're in there thinking about how do I swing, which I think we both agree can be very harmful.
Definitely. That's actually something to kind of expand upon. Do you want players to have swing thoughts or setup thoughts, or do you just want them to train it all in
No,
practice and then just go trust it?
say that one more time because you broke up a little. The
Oh,
audio broke up a little bit.
yeah. So in terms of technique, do you want players to have any swing thoughts on the course or any setup thoughts, or do you just want them to train it on the range and short game area and just trust it on the course, or what's kind of your philosophy there?
I would say that a swing thought or a setup thought can be super, super helpful. It can calm you. It can say, you could be like, I'm so nervous I can't breathe or swallow. But if I just do this one thing, I'm going to hit a great shot. So it can be super helpful. But we ought to have a conversation about how many things your brain can handle. All right. Well, if you're dead calm, if we're like this, we could kind of have 6, 7, 8 things that we could be aware of or think about. Think about is the wrong way to say it. Be aware of. But under stress, it's like two. Like under stress, your brain doesn't work nearly as well, right? So if you have more than two, you're making a mistake because you might be able to do more than that on the range, but you're not going to do it in a tournament. All right. So
Hmm.
keep it to one. My preference would be one setup thought maximum, one backswing thought maximum, one downswing thought maximum. That would be the absolute max. All right. My preference would be to have one instead of three. But the time is you don't think about those things over the ball. You rehearse them before you walk in. So you want to create a proprioception or awareness of what I'm going to feel. To let's imagine. Let me give you a scenario, okay? Because I think people are thinking like, oh, my stock swing from the middle of the fairway with no wind and a middle pin. Well, you don't get that 4% of the time. All right. Imagine you got a tree in your way and you got to hit a 9 iron around this tree, but you only get to hit it, you got to hit 20 yards short of what a 9 iron goes. So I got this crazy 110-yard 9 iron shot I got to cut. Well, I got to feel the motion and the setup perhaps that's going to allow me to hit this shot. So in my rehearsal before I walk in, I'm going to get way closer to the ball. I'm going to get that toe down, heel up a little bit. I'm going to feel the face open and I'm going to feel how I open up and hold off. And I'm going to picture this. I'm basically picturing a shot and I'm kind of feeling the movement and the setup that's going to create it. And then I walk in picturing what I'm trying to do. And then I just do. So you don't want to be a swing thought is not something that you're thinking about consciously over the ball.
Mhm.
I'm once again, a process is getting your mind right before you play. So a swing thought's something you do before you hit your shot, not so much during. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, I think that's great. I always encourage, like, if I do any mental golf coaching with students, I say if you are working on something, do that like back behind the ball, like with your practice swings, kind of feel that motion or that swing thought that you're looking for. But then that way, when you're over the ball, think about that target and pretty much just spend less time over it because overthinking typically doesn't lead to the best results.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would take that rehearsal swing on every single shot because
Hmm.
every single shot requires a strategy and a picture. And so you're got a picture in your head, you rehearse the sensation that produces it, and now you just do, right? So anyway, so that would be what's we would call running a process, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love how much mental emphasis you have. I need to read that other book you have too. That sounds awesome. Well, one thing I feel like with a lot of people have routines, right? They know like, okay, I need a full swing routine, but the short game routine and putting routine are very different. And I feel like no one has a ton of consistency. So what does a good short game routine look like? Where do you take your practice swings? Where, do you pick a landing zone? What's James Wicked Smart tips for
Yeah.
the
Oh,
short game side of things?
it would be different for putting and bunker than it would be, let's say, shots are right around the green. But to pick one, let's just go. Well, we can do all three if you want, but depending on your time. But let's just
Perfect.
pick wedge play right around the green, inside
Yep.
30-yard carry. All right. So uh, let's say you have three clubs you typically use. It's going to be one of these three. It's going to be my pitching wedge, my sand iron, or my lob wedge. Okay. Usually I skip the gap wedge. All right. So I have my three clubs in hand. I look at the lie. I might walk halfway and picture how the ball's going to roll into the hole if I was putting. And then I come back and I'm thinking, okay, what club does it feel like? Oh, it feels like my sand wedge. What trajectory should I hit? I got lower than normal, normal, and higher. So I'm just going to go do normal like 80% of the time. That's sorry. Hey, Winnie, stop. Sorry.
No, you're
So
fine.
I have my club, I have my trajectory, right? Now I'm just going to picture my landing spot and the roll into the ball. All right. So now I have a strategy and a picture. I might walk in, eyes up, looking at my landing spot. I might take one rehearsal swing, feeling the motion that's going to produce that, set up, one look, let it fly. Now, in addition, there's not just a pre-shot routine, but there's also a post-shot, which is where the magic happens from your self-image, right? It's like I'm going to self-coach myself in a positive way. Let's say I hit an amazing shot. Well, I'll give it the Tiger Woods club twirl, right? What if I happen to hit a shot that I don't doesn't meet my expectation? Well, I'm not going to throw a pity party. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to be introspective without judgment and say, you know what? If I had a do-over, I would have played more break, or I
Mm.
would have used the lob wedge because that ball ran out more than I thought and landed it there. And so you just replay it in a positive way. So every shot has a positive outcome. And it's not like I'm thinking positive if I skull the ball across the green. Let's not be stupid, right? That's
Yeah.
not it. It's just not thinking negative. It's just
Hmm.
not turning it into a pity party. So
Hmm.
no information. Oh, skull across the green. This is what I do when that happens, and then replay it in your mind, and then you just let it be. You just got to leave it, right? So I teach. That's a big thing I teach with not just amateurs, but with through clients as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the post shot routine too. I feel like that's another thing that most golfers could benefit from. And instead of just berating themselves, it's like, hey, what can I learn from this? What went well? And then, like you said, even acknowledging when you do hit it well. Like a lot of us, it's always I always joke like you hit a great drive, you pick up that tee so fast, you don't even watch it, and obviously it feels good, but you don't even like give yourself any props. But then you hit one bad shot, and so many golfers just berate themselves and tear themselves down. So I like the post shot routine for really all parts of the game. And then you said it's different for bunkers and different for putting. So let's dive into bunkers a little bit too, because I mean, I have a lot of stats in my new book with amateur golf data from bunkers. We're not very good. And so I'd love to improve on that. For bunkers, would you like to start on routine stuff or more on the technique and analyzing the lie?
Well, let's just go with designing your shot. So the first thing you got to know is like what are the bunker conditions? Are they firm or soft? Because that influences how far the ball's going to come out, given a certain club selection and energy, right? And then so typically I would go up and try and visualize like the last half of the roll of the ball into the hole. So I'm on the green first,
Mm,
kind of picturing if I was putting from the landing area, so to speak, what's going to happen. Because you can't, let's say you have a 30-yard bunker shot. Can you really see what's going to happen in the last 10 feet from 30 yards away? No, no, it's just a guess. And maybe you're saying, well, I don't hit it good enough out of the bunker to matter. Well, then that's, to me, you feel defeated already. I want you
mhm,
to be amazing. So we'll read the last little bit like it's going in. You crawl in the bunker. You got to choose the right club. And that's based on the conditions of the sand, firm or soft, and the distance. All right. And then ultimately, since you really got to be careful about taking a practice swing, right? If you're going to take
mhm,
an air swing, that's one thing. Typically, if you're going to take a practice swing out of the bunker, you do it outside the bunker.
mhm,
And then you walk in, you look at the landing spot, and then you got to feel the energy. So it's basically like you set up, put your feet in there so you can kind of feel the texture of the sand, look at the landing spot, and then I just kind of feel the energy that would produce that uh, shot, so to speak.
So if you can't see the landing spot because of a lip, do you try and imagine like a flight window or what's kind of the thought
No,
process? Or are
it's
you
just
just
it's a metaphorical
mm,
spot. I mean, a lot of times you can't see something that's 30 yards away, or you're going to land it 20 yards away. You can't really see.
mm,
Oh, there's a discoloration on the green. It's not it. It's just like
yeah.
yeah, it's like a bucket. I mean, I see this thing flying over in the hula hoop, and and you got this picture in your brain, and you let it fly. The putting is quite different because usually a lot of times practice swings and putting can be harmful because if you're thinking about the target while you take your practice swing, then it's helpful. But most people think about their stroke. They're thinking about
Mhm,
like, was it my left shoulder that's moving the club, or don't take it outside. So they're taking their practice swing, they're thinking about the club or they're thinking about their body. And I think that's makes a practice stroke harmful. So you start with your green reading routine. All right. You got to have a green reading process. Mine has like coach has 5 steps to it. Well, you do those same 5 steps the same way every single time, regardless of the putt, other than maybe a tap in. All right. Well, once you have your green routine, then you're going to have your shot routine. So now let's say I have my strategy already because I've done my green reading. Well, once again, the first thing I like doing is I like getting like Stuart Sink would call it 3 seconds piece. Takes a breath, trying to get 3 seconds apiece, walks in with his eyes up, picturing his putt. Start line entry into the hole. And then let's say I'm a no practice swing person. Then I'm putting the putter in a certain way. I'm shuttling my feet. I'm uh, one look or two looks. It depends. It's defined, right? And then hopefully you're picturing, and then you're like just doing. And whatever it is, it doesn't really like. There's no magic amount of looks or no magic way to crawl into the ball. It's about comfort. And the real purpose of a routine is not so that it takes 11.1 seconds every time. The real purpose of routine is so that it becomes automated so you can actually focus on what you're trying to do, which is execute this, roll the ball up to the hole with the right speed. But if you're thinking about your routine, you're distracted. You know what I'm saying? So people do it wrong. Like I'm so on my routine that I'm not on my shop. So
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to regiment it to the point where it just becomes somewhat automated so that you don't have to think, you just get your brain on and that takes some reps to get to the point where it's automated. You tie your shoe and it's automated. I want you to walk into a putt and I want it to be automated, you know?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like you have to practice that routine. Everybody wants all the benefits of it, but then if they don't ever do it, at the short game area or putting green or
But
driving range,
they never do it on the putting green. They never do
exactly.
it.
Yeah. So
No, which is
how would you
when
recommend getting that into practice routines? Is that just like something when you're doing that competitive practice, like you mentioned, or where should
well, if you read now, I have a putting book, but it would be the same as that book you held up. This is what we do, and we do it every single day. You do your block practice first. That's
Mhm.
your technique to make sure. Now, the goal of block practices get done as quickly as possible. That's the goal. People get it completely wrong.
Hmm.
They think the goal of block practice, they got a mirror down, they got this gate. They think if they do 100, they're grooving their stroke. That's
Right.
wrong. That's
Okay.
BS. What you're trying to do is you've already learned how to aim. You've already learned how to return the face to square. It's a feel that you get. So what you're going to do is you put your mirror down and your gate down, if that's what you do. And as soon as you do 8 of them, whatever, you go, oh, it's my lucky day. I can aim well and hit the ball in the middle and return the face to square. The goal is to get it done in 2 minutes if you can. Once it's done, now your goal shifts to developing skill. Well, one skill beyond green reading, right, would be to get your mind right on every shot. So after you do your 8 ball warm up with your mirror, so to speak, you ought to have, I would, if you were my student, I'd create a game where you had to shoot a score and you do your full process. So I might create uh, a 3 footer, a 3 footer, a 5 footer, and a 7 footer random, and you're going to do it on 3 different holes. All right, that's 12 putts, right? 3 footer, 3 footer, 5 footer, 7 footer. Full green reading routine,
Mhm.
uh, full like walk in, eyes up, boom, post shot, and that might be the next thing you do. Now, 12 putts full routine, green reading might take you 7, 8 minutes. So you did 2 minutes of technique work and 7, 8 minutes of short putting with full process.
Mhm.
Do you think you go to, I do it every day. I'm a member of a club. So I go to a club and I do my thing and then I start my game playing and I'm doing full process. I promise you I'm the only one doing a full process on the putting green. Everybody else drops 3 balls and they putt.
That's exactly the line I start with in the putting sections. Everybody just throws three balls down and hopes they somehow get better. You're obviously a number one ranked teacher in the world too, so we should probably be listening to you and using that process. That's very, very helpful. Hopefully, people can just start adding some intention. I like that you even said block practice is to be done as fast as possible. I've never heard that. You kind of mentioned it with the other student you said with the 12, I think 12 shots at the chipping green. And so
Yeah,
it's interesting to hear less block practice on is that short game specific, or do you feel like that's also with the long game?
it's everything. It's everything.
Okay.
Let's be clear. If you're learning a new motor pattern,
Hmm.
then the block practice, which is one after the other in a learning environment. Okay.
Hmm.
Repeatable, you're getting feedback that aids learning. It takes what it takes. If it takes me 3 hours to learn it, then I'm staying there for 3 hours until I learn it. Once you've learned it, the motor
Hmm.
program in your brain is established. Your goal is to strengthen it. It myelinates it intensifies, becomes stronger. Let's say.
Hmm.
How do you do that? What do you think? 100 uh, one time or 10 days in a row?
So you're talking
It's
about
10 days in a row.
right? Yeah,
No,
trying to learn.
it's doing it. It's about starting over every day and doing 10
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to strengthen it and own it.
Mm-hmm.
But people do it the other way, like, oh, I'll do 100 and then they'll take 10 days off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then
Mm-hmm.
you revert back to old habits under with inactivity, which is the truth. Inactivity and stress are the two reasons why you revert back to an old motor pattern. So give me the
So
guy that does 10 days in a row over the guy that does 100 easily. And
yeah.
that's another reason why we make our block practice for a guy like Russell Henley or whatever, 12 balls long, is
Mhm.
because if it's a half hour long, are you going to be in the mood to do it every day?
Probably not.
No, I'm not going to have time. I got to go to the store. I got to test. I got to do my taxes. I got things I got to do. So if you want to be a good player and you can't give me 12 good reps, then you don't want to be a good player because 12
Mm.
reps takes 2 minutes,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So my technique is there because I gave 12 mindful reps. Now I have to develop my skill, intrinsic athletic sense of what to do, feeling, feeling it, seeing and feeling and doing, right? And you don't get good reps there either because you're not doing your process. You got the wrong club and you're teeing balls up. You know what I'm saying? It makes players aren't doing the things necessary to be good. The average player. And the good news is it doesn't take more time. It probably takes less time. The problem with it was you do 20 minutes the right way, you're probably going to feel like you need a nap because it takes brain power. It takes being present. It takes intention. It takes mindfulness. And people aren't willing to do that either. And I have, in full disclosure, I have two ways I train. Okay. I have the way I showed you, which I do my warm up putting. Then I start my game playing full process and I'm keeping score and I'm tracking my performance. So when I miss a putt, I'm pissed, right? Because if I don't win this game, I start over. All right. And
Mm.
I'm trying to win this game. And there's value in learning how to win in a frustrated state. Okay. So that let's say that I practiced my putting I did it yesterday. Total amount of time was probably maybe 15 to 18 minutes, but I was all in. Okay. I have another type of practice I do, but I'm not going to call it practice. I'm going to go to the course. I'm going to turn on my speaker. I'm going to get a beer and I'm going to get away from my life and my things that I got to do. And I'm going to listen to music, drink a beer, and putt because the funnest thing for me to do is in life is to putt and chip and hit bunker shots.
Hmm.
I got a little short game area. I take the cart. I go do the thing. That's not really training. That's just me enjoying my life, which is
Hmm.
perfectly allowable. But I'm not getting better. Maybe I'm getting better because I'm having less stress. I have less stress in my life. But it's not like I'm going to practice, right? I'm not going to go develop my skill set there. So let's not confuse those two. I'm either going to go down and I'm going to get something accomplished. By the way, that's a ton of fun too for me. Like
Hmm.
going out there and practicing my putting for 15, 18 minutes yesterday, walking away feeling like I got better
Yeah.
is more enjoyable for me than actually the music and the beer.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I feel like that feeds into the self-image too, like we talked about too, because you're consistently feeling like, yeah, yeah, I have a plan, whether that's to have the beer and just have some fun because I had a shitty day at work, or it's, hey, I am feeling really focused today. I got some good sleep. I can, put in a good 30, 40 minutes on my putting. And then you just start to become that person that consistently shows up and is having fun and is making progress. And I feel like that's just a really good slippery slope in a good way to kind of get down. And any other last minute practice habits you feel like golfers should kind of steer clear of before we let you go?
well, I mean, I don't know. There's so many things that they do wrong, and I'm lucky enough that I go to a facility here uh, occasionally, and they have an area where instead of like a flat tee box, a fairway, it's
Hmm.
like rolling hills, and
Mm.
you can go hit balls there, right? So I can hit one off an upslope. I can hit one with the ball below my feet. I can hit one out of the rough. If you're an elite driver of the ball, you're hitting 70% of your fairways. That means 30% of your iron shots are out of the rough. Do you ever hit an iron shot out of the rough in practice? No. Well, you can say, well, the facility is not designed for that. I'm like, well, this could be an excuse, isn't it?
Mm.
So the reality is you should, 7% of your shots in golf are trouble shots. Are you hitting the 112-yard slicing 9 iron on the range? Because you're going to need it when you play. So
Hmm.
I just would suggest to you that what I do, what you'll see in the back of that book, and I have it in all three, especially the last one, is like, you really want to work on your game? Here's a menu of games you can play to compete. Play three of them.
Hmm.
And it might say, okay, take your 9 iron, hit it 20 yards short of what it normally goes, and slice it 10 yards. Okay, that would be now hit. You got it. hit until you get one within 3 steps of the target. That might be a very simple game that you could play that would be productive,
Hmm.
right? It would be like go off the side of the range into the rough where there's some trees and where you got to hit the ball low to get it out of the trees. Hit 10 shots under the trees without hitting the tree or whatever. I mean, you got to occasionally replicate the skills required to be decent.
Hmm.
And that's not technique, is it? That's a picture and a be able to do.
Yeah.
But people don't do it. And then of course they get that trouble shot and they screw it up and now they got another trouble shot and they make a seven.
Mm.
So trouble shots have value typically more than a shot. You know, you
Hmm.
pull it off, you can save a par, and you screw it up, it's a triple. Whereas a 3 foot putt has a value of one stroke. So we're
Yeah.
gonna, so it's like simple things.
Hmm. Man, so much good stuff. I could talk to you all day, James. I appreciate you so much for being here. Before getting to my last question, where is the best place for people to follow you? I know you have all your books, you have your website. Anywhere specific you'd like me to send them to?
Yeah, I do. I have a group. Uh, it's called shortgamemastery.com, where you can access the technical stuff that I believe in the bunker chipping, distance wedges, putting through a
Mm,
series of videos. Uh, Most people learn better visually than they do by reading a book, so to speak. And then we have a community on Facebook where I do a Zoom and people can send in their videos for review and ask questions like, I'm not sure I'm doing this right. And gentleman that worked with me, Matthew Tipper, and I will get in there and we'll talk you through it. So that's called shortgamemastery.com.
perfect. Good. Definitely. I will link to that. I'll link to your Instagram on there as well. And then for my last question, we have a lot of individuals that have got inspired by listening to the show and they're starting to get into competition. Maybe their first member guest is going to be coming up, first country club, tournament, and they're, a little nervous. What are some tips you would recommend, or maybe one tip just to help people get into those first events and kind of overcome some of those nerves?
Right. All right. So let's not call it nervous. Let's call it excited. You're just in an excited stage. So what you're trying to do is the same stuff you do every single day on a special day. It's an exciting day. It's an opportunity to win a championship or whatever. If you're trying to get rid of those feelings, like something's wrong with me, I'm feeling so nervous, right? You're screwed because now you you're judging yourself on why am I feeling nervous, right? The reality is you're supposed to feel that way. Players sleeping on a lead or winning a big tournament, they have a tough time breathing. They have a tough time swallowing. You got to play good anyway. And so what you really need to do is make peace with that. Or I have somebody I really respected, this performance psychologist says, just make room for it. Make room for it to be there. Now, what do you got to do to execute the shot? And if you can learn to intently focus on execution and allow this thing to be there and not make it a thing, not like, oh my God, I'm so nervous, right? First, I talk in my book about reframing, like, no, I'm just excited. It's normal. I'm not doing this for anybody but myself. All right, now I know I feel this way, but what do I have to do to execute? All right, let's say you line your ball up in your putt. Well, I'm going to make sure the line of my ball is perfect. All right, now I'm going to get lost in the target and I'm going to make sure I roll that up there with the right speed. Well, those are controllables
Mhm.
where you're just executing in a big moment when you don't feel normal. And that's a skill that takes practice. And obviously, the more you do it, the better you get at it. But the first step is to realize nothing's wrong with you when you feel that way. Your body's a normal way to get you ready. Matter of fact, adrenaline is the best chemical. It's the best performance chemical drug on the planet. It makes you stronger. It creates hyper focus, get the heart rate up. All good things when it comes to athletic endeavor. You just got to learn to kind of harness that energy, so to speak.
Fantastic advice. I actually mentioned that in my first book too. You got to reframe it. If you keep saying you're nervous, you're nervous, you're nervous, it's not going to help anything. So thank you so much for being here again, James. You provided so much value. Anytime you'd like to come on, talk about the short game or golf at all, love to learn more. And thanks so much for linking or sharing the resource. I'll make sure to link to that. And I just appreciate you being here.
All right. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.